Humankind had been migrating its excessive population to space for over half a century. Hundreds of colossal space colonies drifted in orbit around the Earth. On the terraformed inner walls of these cylinders, people found their homes, where they lived, had children, and passed on. The year is Universal Century 0079. Side 3 has declared itself the Principality of Zeon and began a war for independence against the Earth Federation. In only a month, half of humanity's population was slaughtered. And it was all because Bandai decided to create a Gundam game with Dynasty Warriors' signature 1 vs 1000 hack-and-slash gameplay. Dynasty Warriors Gundam went on to sell over 100,000 copies on its first day of release, the first title on the at the time recently launched PlayStation 3 to do so. How has the game held up all of these years later? And is it worth revisiting now that so many successor games have been released? Let's find out. Dynasty Warriors Gundam was originally released on March 1st, 2007, exclusively for the PlayStation 3. Known in Japan as Gundam Musou, the game was later ported to the Xbox 360 as Gundam Musou International, and the PlayStation 2 as Gundam Musou Special. It was the second Gundam game to be released on 7th generation consoles after Mobile Suit Gundam Crossfire, and not only holds the distinction of being the first third-party Warriors collaboration title, being succeeded by other giants such as The Legend of Zelda and One Piece, but also the first Musou game to be released on the then next generation consoles. I've always thought the name Dynasty Warriors Gundam was a terrible title. Of course, I understand why they chose this name, but I've always felt a name like Gundam Warriors or Gundam Unleashed would have been a less cringy title. For the sake of this review, I'll be using its original title, Gundam Musou, and the Western releases Dynasty Warriors Gundam interchangeably. Also, for this review, I've recorded footage of the American version on the Xbox 360, as well as the Japanese footage for the PlayStation 2 and 3. If you see the game in English, it's the Xbox version. If you see it in Japanese but HD, it's the PS3 version. PlayStation 2 gameplay will be in 4x3. There are some differences between each of the versions, which I'll cover later in this video. Koei was absolutely dominating it with their Warriors titles in 2007. With Samurai Warriors 2 and Dynasty Warriors 5 being absolute hits with their player bases, Warriors Orochi just weeks away, and the thought of the first true HT Warriors game, Dynasty Warriors 6, drawing ever near, Koei could do little wrong. Gundam Musou retains the stellar gameplay the other games in the genre of the time were known for. You're able to attack in a chain combo of up to 4 inputs, which repeat afterwards by continuing to press the main attack button. At any point, the combo chain can be modified by hitting the special attack. You're also able to use ranged weaponry by hitting the special attack button outside of a melee attack chain, but frankly, it's pretty disappointing. Ranged attacks do only a fraction of damage that melee attacks dish out, so they're useful only in very specific cases, like as you're walking up to enemies to perform normal attacks or to break an enemy's combo at a distance. Frankly, it's quite disappointing, considering the game is based off of a show that has the majority of the action happening with various types of long-range weaponry. Gundam Musou does bring some novelties to the already solid formula. You're now able to dash in every direction, as well as thrust upward into the air. Dashing allows not only for its own set of unique attack chains to be performed, but also makes the game feel much more aggressive and fast-paced than other similar titles. Zipping around the battlefield and dodging enemy attacks feels very tight and was a great addition to the game. Each mobile suit also has a rechargeable boost gauge, which powers your suit's ability to both thrust into the air and to dash or fly through the air, depending on the mobile suit being used. Mobile suits like the Double Zeta and Wing Gundam are able to transform in air and fly throughout the battlefield using this mechanic. Once this gauge is depleted all the way, it overheats and can't be used again until fully recharging. Gundam Musou allows players to use an ultimate attack, known as a Musou attack, in combat. Similar to Koei's previous title, Samurai Warriors 2, up to 3 Musou gauges can be unlocked as you level up, and the power of your Musou attack is dependent on how many Musou gauges you consume while unleashing it. A Musou attack using 1 gauge is very different from one that uses 3 gauges, and usually is much shorter without as many attack chains unleashed. It's a really nice mechanic and a great development on the Musou system found in Koei's Warriors titles. Battles are divided into territories, known as fields, similar to what is found in Dynasty Warriors 5 Empires. As enemies in a field are defeated, the field's health depletes. Depending on the field in question, once fully exhausting a field's health, it either transfers to your control or a boss enemy appears, which yield the field to your force upon their defeat. Leaving a zone unconquered will allow it to regenerate health, so it's better to take one out when you begin assaulting it. Conquering any field also has an effect on the rest of the stage, as neighboring fields will have a reduction in strength for every adjacent field taken. Like you, the enemy also has ace pilots, or named enemies on the battlefield with significantly stronger abilities than your average pilot. When these guys are defeated in battle, they may drop parts that can be used to customize and improve your unit's fighting and shooting abilities, as well as your defense and armor. If you and an enemy ace pilot attack one another at the same time, a deadlock ensues. Both of you dash back and receive an attack boost for a shorter time interval. Gundam Musou is a very cinematic game. Cutscenes in the game look phenomenal, and usually mirror iconic scenes from the original anime. The mech models all look really great too, and are highly detailed with decent reflections off the parts and layers of dirt and grime to boot. There's also some gorgeous particle effects that still look impressive all of these years later. There are nice little details like rocket thrusters that activate on the Gundam's feet when boosting and flying. It's also pretty impressive how many enemies the game can render on screen, with considerably more NPCs being able to render compared to Koei's previous titles, thanks to the increased power of the 7th generation consoles. Enemies break up into several parts, with limbs separating and flying all over the place, which is a great touch, and the game sports a very respectable draw distance considering everything being rendered. Unfortunately, not all of the game's graphical presentation is that stellar. All of the game's mobile suits hold their long-range weaponry until they actively attack, in which case, suddenly, their massive rifles disappear and are replaced with beam sabers. I get that it makes the game's mobile suits look more authentic and true to their anime counterparts, but the transition is just far too jarring in practice. Also, the environments are pretty bland, and even by the PS2 standards. I get most of the hardware is rendering all the enemies on screen, but it would have been nice to see some variety throughout a stage, instead of the same handful of ugly assets repeatedly pasted everywhere. Overall, the graphics are okay. The environments are bland, especially in official mode, but the excellent mobile suit models and stellar particle effects make up for it. Like the graphics, other aspects of Gundam Musou can be a bit spotty. The game sports a ton of mobile suits, but the vast majority can't be piloted. Why can't Jared use the Boundock, or Char his Zagok? Fortunately, later Gundam Musou titles would fix this, but it seemed lazy on Koei's part that they just put so many suits in the game, complete with at least some measure of a working moveset, only to keep them unplayable. Speaking of movesets, the game has several movesets that are functionally identical in gameplay, such as the Titans and AU versions of the Mark II, or the three different Cubulis in the game. Palette swaps and duplicate movesets are lazy, and it's something that Koei would become increasingly known for in their later Warriors titles. Likewise, the amount of stages the game has is laughable, and many of the battles feel a bit too repetitive because of this. Pilots level up independently of their mobile suits, which have to be leveled up under each pilot that uses them. Although any pilot can use any mobile suit playable in the game, each character has their own unique stats, strengths, and weaknesses, so it's generally better to only use mobile suits that synergize well with them in terms of abilities. I generally only use the mobile suits that any given pilot used in their original stories, and this always ensured I didn't have a bad pilot and suit combination. There is some incentive to using multiple mobile suits under a pilot, however, as each mech has 3 skills it can teach the game's characters. The sound design in Gundam Musou is a high point for the game. There are some great instrumental versions of a lot of the songs from the original anime from the various Gundam series represented. Full English and Japanese voices are implemented here in Western versions of the game, in addition to the Japanese Xbox 360 version. Double Musou attacks with officers result in their own unique character dialogue, a touch that goes above and beyond the series' norm. Dynasty Warriors Gundam ships with 2 independent story modes, Official and Original Mode. Official Mode follows the early Universal Century timeline, specifically retracing the events of the original Mobile Suit Gundam and its sequel series, Zeta and Double Zeta Gundam. There are 6 characters to play through, and each story is told through the pilot's perspective as they recount the memories of their past. Completing a pilot's official mode storyline also unlocks them in original mode. Like the rest of the game, however, the stories can be spotty. Although no character's story is all that long, many characters' entire story is told through a whopping 2 stages. How can you possibly tell all of the highlights of Judo's story and that of Double Zeta Gundam, a 47-episode series, in 2 stages, both of which are recycled from other characters? It feels lazy, and I'd rather the characters not be present in official mode if they're not given the attention they deserve. Despite that, there are some neat touches, like mobile suit variations that are considered canon but not found in the original anime, being implemented throughout the story. Overall, the mode just doesn't reach the standard it should have. The combat is fun, and the cutscenes are great, but it's far too short, and what stages we do get are repeated constantly for every single character, despite what series they're from. Original mode fares much better in Gundam Musou, where you investigate a mysterious planet headed on a collision course with Earth, using various characters from the UC timeline, as well as pilots in mobile suits from G Gundam, Gundam Wing, and Turna Gundam. Frankly, the mode story isn't that riveting, but it more than suffices as a backdrop for the characters of multiple series to be matched together in a lot of unique landscapes, such as ice fields and inside of a volcano. Although there aren't a ton of stages here either, they're at the very least very colorful and unique, and feel very different from one another, and most importantly, are great to play through. Original mode sports far more characters than official mode, and each character has about 5 stages of their own to play through. If I had anything overtly negative to say about original mode, it'd be that there aren't really any enemy mobile suits outside of the UC ones found in the official story mode. It would have been nice to see a bit more variety, and maybe some enemy units from the other represented Gundam series here. Although the game is a bit bare bones in some places, there are still some nice extras that have been implemented. Split-screen co-op returns from the other games in the Warriors series, and plays very well. 3 versus mode stages are also available, assuming you're able to find someone that'd be willing to play with you nowadays. These include Normal Match, a 1 versus 1 duel pitting you against another player, Warriors Match, where you try and destroy the surrounding enemies to recover more items than your opponent, and Shotdown, where you each compete to defend a field against an enemy attack. If you die, or if a total of 50 enemies invade your field before either happens to your opponent, you lose. Although not necessarily groundbreaking, the multiplayer options are a nice touch and can provide hours of fun on their own. It would have been nice to see an online multiplayer component in the game, but I wouldn't really knock the game for lacking it, considering this was an early PS3 title. The game also supports a very thorough gallery mode. Here, you can view biographies on the player and non-player characters, view technical information such as height and weight and view the extensive amount of mobile suit and ship models, replay character dialogue heard throughout the game, and view pilot stats and their respective rankings. It's a great resource if you're unfamiliar with the Gundam franchise, or need a refresher, or if you're just curious which characters you've racked the most kills with. Overall, it's a nice touch and a decent enough resource to cover the basics of Gundam for any player unfamiliar with the ins and outs of the franchise. As mentioned, Gundam Musou originally released for the PlayStation 3, but was later ported to the Xbox 360, and then reworked for the PlayStation 2 even later, this time with bonus content. In my experience, it seems the PS3 version may look ever so slightly worse than the Xbox 360 version, although it isn't enough to notice without looking at them side by side. The PS3 version did, however, have noticeably longer load times for me than the 360. Overall though, there are no drastic differences between the two, and they're essentially identical. It is important to mention that the 360 version does have achievement support, something the PS3 version lacks entirely, as Sony had not implemented trophies at the time of its release. The US version of the game is also slightly cheaper for the Xbox 360 compared to the PlayStation 3. Although, if you're okay with importing, the original Japanese version on PS3 goes for very little online, and is extremely import friendly, complete with English menus. The PS2 version, known as Gundam Musou Special, is interesting in that it's a port to an older console, this time with bonus content. Although it was never localized for Western audiences, I'm happy to say it plays very well. The character models and particle effects, of course, don't look as good as their next-gen counterparts, and the draw distance is slightly lower, but they've done a really good job on the SD version. It looks like more or less the same game, just played at a lower resolution. This version also comes with a new mobile suit, the Musha Gundam Mark II, as well as original mode stories for both it and the original Musha Gundam. Although the Musha Gundam Mark II is a really cool unit to play as, it's definitely not worth hunting down a copy of the PS2 version just for this. It's just not enough content in my opinion to warrant the PS2 version over the others if you have access to them. Overall, Dynasty Warriors Gundam plays well no matter which platform you're able to grab it on. So would I recommend Dynasty Warriors Gundam nowadays? Honestly, not really. Don't get me wrong, it's a fun game with stellar combat and a superb presentation. But it's just far too bare bones nowadays to recommend to anyone but the biggest of Musou or Gundam fans. If you see a copy for cheap, go for it. But otherwise, I'd say try out one of the 3 sequels that were later released in the series. They retain this game's positive qualities, while also heavily improving on its negatives, and also include substantially more content. Thanks for tuning into my review of Dynasty Warriors Gundam. For gameplay of this and other games, check out my other channel, Jay Plays Archives, where I chronicle all the gameplay you see in my reviews. I'll leave a link in the description below. Also, if you liked this video, be sure to drop a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more retrospective reviews of the Musou series. Let me know your favorite moments from Dynasty Warriors Gundam or other Musou and Gundam games in the comments below. Thanks for watching.